And I believe we are live, brother.
All right.
Ace
like
Callwood. Good afternoon, sir.
John, how you doing, man?
I'm good, brother. As
That's good.
as we got a chance to talk a little bit pre Zoom discussion, obviously Ace's equipment and people are much better than mine, so we're gonna we're gonna figure that out on some future discussions. But I want to invite everybody to Black Men's Health, our Zoom and our discussions that need to be had. We want to welcome Ace as our first speaker in this summer lunch series. We wanted to provide a platform to have some tough and interesting and difficult discussions. It's an interesting time in the world now. Ace and I have been talking through this for a while, as many as I have been talking through a lot of this with a lot of people, probably since 1999. But we can get in the background later. We can get into Ace's bio later. I promise we're going to have short discussions, and you all can read all about Ace on our Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and future LinkedIn, which I believe my team is telling me we need to set up so we can get into all of that. So Ace, obviously I want to have a discussion with you. We can start by your amazing medium masterpieces, I call it. Those are my words. I said that because you spoke for a lot of us, how we're feeling today, and some of those pressures and discussions and requests that are coming our way as people of color, specifically Black people in this moment. So with that said, Ace, I'm gonna open the floor to you. I wanna know the inspiration for writing that. I know you were in the lab. It's interesting because Ace shot me a text and said, "Hey, you might want to read this before you invite me on." And I said, no, it's good. It's good. It represents me and many people. So Ace, give us a little bit of background, man.
Yeah. So I guess it's been a couple weeks now. I published a Medium article, or an essay perhaps, on the first of the month, in light of the racial tension and the protesting against police brutality, and just the spotlight on the Black community. And I think about some of my professional, I suppose, titles or hats that I wear, and all of those things aside, I wrote that piece from the perspective of a Black man in America, which feels like a full-time job in and of itself a lot of the time, particularly right now. So the Medium piece is entitled "The Burden of Finally Being Seen." And I came up with the title like a week, I guess, prior, as a result of several conversations I had with people I love dearly, white folks, Black folks, colleagues, friends, etc. There was just this deluge, it felt like, of conversations about what's going on in America right now. And a lot of outreach, all of it well-intentioned, or most of it at least, again, from people I love dearly. But I just kept getting the same conversations over and over, and the same questions and the same check-ins. And all of those things are important. But I think, I know that so many of us are feeling that, the amount of people checking in. And it started to take an emotional, a mental toll. So I joked with a couple friends, over the preceding couple days, and I said, if I write a piece, it'll be the burden of being seen. And so that I didn't change the title much, if at all, and wrote that piece. And I wrote it in 25, 30 minutes. I edited for significantly longer than that, but it just kind of flowed out because it was really an amalgamation of several conversations that had happened in the not too distant past at that point, and ultimately ended up being what I think is, for me, one of the most rewarding pieces of writing or speaking or being able to share my experiences and my 2 cents, is that it has helped spark some conversations in families that might not have had that otherwise. And it's been, the conversation piece to share across friends and peers. And for me, it was a way to kind of put my thoughts in one place and then point back to the piece that I had written, which, I think there's some guilt in feeling lazy. Is like, well, I wrote this, go read that, so I don't have to talk to you. But at the same time, that was kind of the point. So there's some cognitive dissonance, I suppose, for me. But that's the background on the burden of finally being seen. And it's, I think, 20,000 or so folks have read it on Medium.
Wow.
5 or 6,000 in a couple other. A thing that I wrote for me and turns out has resonated, which was not my intention or the goal. It was just to get my words out and into the public sphere. Really cool to see how it's taken off.
So what has your response been, Ace? What have people, I mean, obviously, to your point, a lot of people have reached out. I think, people with well-intentioned, some of them, as you noted, are just checking in, just want to make sure, how are we doing? How am I doing in this? How's my family doing? Some people are definitely probably struggling with where they are in the world and what can they do? How could they help further the cause? How could they, assist in the sense of moving, moving progress forward, right? Moving into 2020, which a lot of people are still not. And I think definitely some of these past several weeks have clearly made that or brought that to people's attention that everybody is not living in 2020. So what have been some of those personal responses to you after reading the piece?
Yeah, they're a wide spectrum, right? I mean, I've got. They tell you never to read the comments. I, like an idiot, have been reading the comments. And there's
those comments.
Oh man, there are some. I had a couple older white guys respond on Medium and on Facebook, etc., and say, "Well, you didn't tell us what to do. You didn't tell us how to be better allies." And I had a draft. I actually drafted a response to two of the guys on Medium. I wrote and sent a significantly shorter response than I had drafted because I kind of launched. It was like, you're missing the point. If for one, you've missed that, there's a segment in that piece that says, I want you to sit with this discomfort as long as it takes to feel you have to do something. And then I want you to go do something, and maybe not verbatim, but close to it. And that was, that in and of itself is prescriptive, right? It feels intangible, it feels nebulous, but actually just sitting and using some silence to drive consideration and in some intentionality about the next step. That's an important piece of the work, is just taking some time to step back and shut off some of the noise and just sit with yourself, sit with oneself, right? Because often, given how much we're inundated by information and data and posts and social and life and family, we don't have time or take time or space to just sit. So that was one of the recommendations, and again, that's prescriptive. So my first draft of my response to those guys was, I reject your shared premise that I have not given you something to do. I didn't send it like that, but that's how I thought it very loudly. And then secondly, there's actually a link in my piece, and I believe I linked it in that same section. Originally was 75 things white people can do for racial justice. I believe that's been updated to 97 things, and it's a living, breathing list. A lot of it is just research and homework. And so I think when I talk about burden, there's this expectation, and this is really, really important. There's this expectation that we educate allies and folks who might not have this experience that we're having firsthand. There's this expectation that we give, that we tell, that we do, and
do more work, that we do more.
Therein lies, even to make that ask. And, as I said in the piece, it's I'll engage, I'll educate as I see fit, but I'm not going to feel obligated to do it. So to have two random guys from the internet say, you need to tell us what to do, respectfully, fuck off is how I feel about it.
Yep.
You know, I might give you some information. I might pass more on. I've given a history lesson in this piece to some respects. But this idea that you can pop in and demand that I do more or do differently
Right.
or do the thing that you think I ought to do, you know, it's a job surviving in this country as a Black man. You know, I'm not going to work overtime for you. And I don't know how to say it better than that. So there was some frustration there. But on the flip side, you know, the rewarding stuff, you know, I've had folks, I know I saw Ashley's on the line and a couple other folks listening in or watching, you know, said, hey, I sent this to my little sister, or, you know, my siblings have been sharing this piece. I've had folks' parents who have checked in and dropped lines and been like, this piece has really helped me have conversations or shared some perspective. And that's been really cool to know that the thing that I've been feeling and was able to put words to, was fortunate enough to be able to write about, has shifted the thinking of some folks. But that's a double-edged sword in and of itself as well, right?
Indeed.
Because I've got folks who I've known for the better part of a decade since I moved to Richmond, 12 years ago, who have said this changed everything for me. And part of it is awesome. Glad to have you. Glad you're here. But the other part is, how did you see me for the last 12 years? You know,
Right.
if that's
Right.
been how long we've had this relationship, and me writing this piece 12 years after we met is the thing that changes everything for you. What did you change from, and where were you for the majority of our relationship, the entirety of our relationship? Glad to
Right.
have you. Curious about what the implications of how we interacted, how our engagements were tainted perhaps by some other type of thinking. You know, it just leaves some thought in the back of your mind that maybe you didn't see me fully until now. And I'm glad to have you, but that's problematic, and we ought to talk about it as well. So I'm wrestling with a lot of feelings around that.
I think that that last piece you said is so powerful. I tell the story. I have a good buddy named Alan, and he came to my wedding, was invited to my wedding, and he's a white guy. I love him, known him for a very long time, and I'm a member of a fraternity, and Alpha Phi Alpha, FAMU, Beta Nu. And one of the things that we do at wedding ceremonies and other ceremonies, but we definitely lock up, we sing the hymn, and usually in some way, shape, or form, we usually end up celebrating by stepping. For a guy like Alan, who has only seen me for, at that point, if I met Alan probably in let's just say 1997 or so, and I was married in 2003. So for, maybe a little less than a decade, for every other day that Alan might have seen me in a technical environment or working in some kind of business atmosphere and never have seen that side of me, it comes to a wedding, get a chance to celebrate with a whole lot of family and friends. I'm in a tuxedo, maybe no different than me being dressed up in a suit or otherwise. But man, when we start stepping, it was different for him, right? And I remember him addressing that, just like the eyes, like, oh my God, like seeing me in this new light, right? That's just a part, very much a huge piece of me. And obviously with, however many 20 men around me singing to him or more, and then stepping and everybody doing the same thing. Obviously this is something that's very near and dear to me, and something that is very significant in bringing me up in who I am. But it's very easy to compartmentalize that in the sense of that's something he never had a window into seeing who I was, right? So this is very similar in the sense of people not, to your point, they can see you in the light that they've seen you, but never really thought about you in this aspect. And now we're peeling the pieces off. I think that's so much progress in that, right? In the sense of, well, people might have that, that experience to not believe that's anything related to them, and now see, oh man, this could be my man Ace, right? I wrote a little bit about that piece with Christian Cooper, right, in the in the park And the Audubon Society came out and responded in a statement because he, from my understanding, serves on their board, right? And and if you all don't know the story of, if anybody out there doesn't know the story about Christian Cooper, look up Amy Cooper. You can hashtag Amy Cooper. This
No
woman
relation.
who was, no relation, doubtfully distant cousins, but this woman who was really using her voice to really incite a scenario that if the law enforcement would have got there, they would have definitely been thinking that this man was meaning to do her harm. But the Audubon Society came out as a board responding to that. He's on their board, and in their statement, they were referencing, the way they wrote it, they were basically taking him in as their own, which is valuable, right? Because this is not just some random dude. This is not just some atrocity that we got a chance to see on the web or some hashtag. This is one of our own. This is who we love. This is a friend. This is a loved one, right? This is an ally, which I hold that word. That's an interesting word for me, but this is an ally that we hold dear, somebody close to us. So we're responding based on this relationship. And I think that's going to be continually helpful to move things forward when people see John Brown and think about, in these scenarios, if you're looking at George Floyd or his children, how that could be John Brown, right? If you're talking about Ahmaud Arbery and you know that John runs, this could easily be John Brown running through these streets, or John's children running through these streets. This makes it very different than maybe it has been in the past. It's really waking the world up. You start this article, Ace, and I'm telling you, when I read it, I think when you first texted it to me, I told you I need a minute. And I've told a lot of people that, just related to, sometimes I need some time and space to digest this, right? Because there's a lot going on in the world, and just for mental health in general, we have to watch how we consume all of this content. I mean, even the names I just ripped off, we could easily name 30, 40 more names and not even be able to keep up with the names, right? I mean, I remember looking at television sometimes, and you're trying to figure out, is this today or is this last week's scenario? I mean, it's like so much going on, and not new information, just being served probably more quickly to the masses through all of our different, social opportunities and social devices. But you start the article related to the burden of finally being seen. It says we're tired. Right, we're fighting for our lives, and now we're inundated by folks who want to check in. Right, that's saying a lot. But that first part, we're tired. Right, I mean that's a lot. Right, I mean just literally exhausted. Right, so you spoke about the inspiration, but if you could break down, right? Sorry, Ace, I'm gonna ask you to do some more work as a brother. If you could break down, just give a summary, right? I'm hopeful that a lot of people will go to Medium and read this article. We'll make sure that we post it out there so people can have access to it. But if you gave somebody just a summary of what you were saying in this article, give it to them straight, Ace.
Yeah. So, but before I do that, I want to go back to that last piece you were touching on, which is, the Christian Cooper, Amy Cooper, and hopefully now the conversation and the tenor of the conversation is framing that, Ahmaud Arbery could as just as easily be John Brown, or Philando Castile could just as easily be Ace Callwood. I think when we have a situation like Amy and Christian Cooper, again, no relation, in the bird watching incident in Central Park, a lot of the aftermath was, Christian Cooper is Harvard educated and he's on the board of this and that, and he's an LGBTQ rights activist. And, there's that piece is problematic, right? Like the credentialing of Black people in order to say they were one of the good ones is the implicit framing that comes from well, they did this, that, and the third. I posted a while back. It was, Lord knows, I can't even keep track of who's been killed by the cops and which thing I posted. But what I said in light of that post was, if I ever get lynched, I expect you to post the video too. And I said that really pointedly. If I get lynched, I want you to post the video as well. And what I hope is that this is a man who was in a scenario, and I guarantee you that scenario should not have ended in death. A death sentence was not the requisite punishment punishment for anything that was happening there, because there was no court and there was no trial and there was no jury of my peers, and therefore I should not have been sentenced to death, if heaven forbid that ever happens. This idea that there's a certain group of respectable Negroes who ought not be killed, and then there's a group of thugs who, whatever happens to them happens. That's what happens again implicitly when we start to credential, well, this was a good person, in contrast to what happened around Brown. If you remember the coverage there, that phrasing, Mike Brown was no angel. This
Right.
idea that we can introduce some element of doubt, and we know that our country functions as innocent until proven guilty. Introducing some semblance of guilt or some semblance of innocence is not our job. It's to keep people alive, and without these extrajudicial killings across our country. So the idea that we've got organizations speaking out and saying he's one of our own. What I'm finding is, as a result of this piece, I've had friends who are near and dear to my heart say, for the first time, I am seeing you as a part of a larger group rather than my good friend or my person or my partner or colleague or peer. And for as much as Kanye ends up in his own shit here and there, he said it right. And this is the thing that I have tried to translate to a lot of my friends is, you see me as Ace. You see me as person who has been appointed to governors panels and is a collegiate educator and a founder and what have you. But Kanye phrased it as, even though I'm in a Benz, I'm still a nigga in a coupe, right? And that is how society sees us so often, and irrespective of credentialing, when it boils down to why we are at higher risk, it's because of the assumptions that folks make about who we are before they know where we came from, before they know what we do, before they know how we exist in the world. We just look a certain way, and that is a risk. And it's one that we cannot mitigate. I can't mitigate the risk of being Black. There's nothing I can do about that. It's not how I dress. It's not how I speak. It's not whistling Vivaldi, great book if nobody's read it. I can't whistle classical music to make sure people know that I'm one of the good ones. That doesn't work. They still see me as how I look, not who I am. That's the problem. That's where we're starting from. And that leads into, the burden. So let me, I'm gonna pull it up actually, to make sure I remember the order. But as I kick off the piece, it's gone. It's on the internet.
That's right.
Go track it down.
That's right.
No, so I kick off talking about the background, and we started with that already. This idea that I've had a lot of conversations, and this is a distillation of a lot of those. I also note that this time feels different, right? There's so much happening today in protests, and how many people, how many different types of folks from all walks of life are involved and engaged in the fight against police brutality, the fight for racial equity, and ultimately supporting the Black community. Black men, Black trans individuals, supporting the Black community as a whole in our fight for, we say equality a lot, equity, and getting to a place where we have the resources we need to survive. And a lot of that is predicated on the racial inequity that has existed in our country for the better part of 4 centuries. So I note that, look, it's awesome that folks are in the mix and it feels different, and there's some hope there. I'm inspired by that. But there's also work to do. So I also note that there cannot be, I can't speak for all Black people. It's not a thing. Jon Brown can't speak for all Black people. None of us can. We don't have a spokesperson. We're all individuals. And in my diversity and inclusion consulting work that I have the privilege of being able to share with corporates and public institutions and academics. In the work that we do, part of overcoming bias is to start individualizing people instead of attributing them to the larger group to which they may belong, but cannot define who they are as an individual. So being able to make that distinction between a group of Black folks and one Black person is one of the most valuable things we can do to start mitigating or overcoming the bias that exists naturally based on where we grew up and how we were raised and what our parents did and the school we went to, so on and so forth. So there's so many elements that go into that bias, but the attributing attributes to one individual rather than an entire group is a big piece of that work, that process, the long work, as we like to speak to it. So that's how we kicked off.
Hey, Ace, can I hold off before you move forward, if you don't mind me addressing that piece? And that did hit me when you read it, in the sense of, like, we don't have a spokesperson, right? So anytime you look up and see, whoever, right? Whoever, I won't even start naming names on any news network, right? It's like, that's one person's opinion, right? That's one Black man's opinion. That's one Black woman's opinion. I had, to your point, Ace, I had a opportunity many moons ago to serve the 4th District of the American Advertising Federation as a district diversity chair. Myself and a good buddy of mine, Pedro Perez, a gentleman of Hispanic descent, got a chance to travel throughout the states and all throughout the state, Florida and Puerto Rico, I believe, to really just make sure that people understood, what multicultural marketing, what a diverse mindset, how it could bring more value to their club. And one of the things I used to open up, we had a presentation called Diversity Unfiltered. So here you have a Black man and a Hispanic man giving their insights, and I always open with, this is one Black man's opinion, right? To your point, right? I'm one of 4 boys, one of 4 brown men in my house. I say boys because that's what my mama calls us. That's not what I expect anybody else to call me. I have to be very clear with that. But I'm one of 4 Black men, young men, 5 men, if you include my pop, in the house. We all grew up in the same home under the same roof, to God be the glory. And based on when we were born, right? My older brother was born in 71. I was born in 74. My younger brother was born in 79. The baby boy was born in 81, 82. Always questionable to me what that date is, being the baby. But if you have discussions with us, there are some very general, kind of like baseline foundational truths of who we are. And then you can have other discussions with us, and we're as far as north and south as possible, right? And that could be based on our education, right? Where we went to school, undergrad, grad, when we were born, who we grew up with, who we could date, who we dated. All of those things come into play. I went to FAMU, as I noted, right? Historically Black college university. Had an opportunity through undergrad work to go work with NASA, right? NASA has a different currency, right? You could care less what you look like, right, man? If you could get that shuttle in the air, right? I mean, you could be whatever. You could be tall, short, Black, white, Asian, Indian, fat, skinny, whatever. Whatever you can be. The currency is about smart, right? How smart, how skilled, intellectually, what do you bring to the table? So the currency is different, right? The baby boy went to Atlanta College of Art in Atlanta, right? I remember walking downstairs one day in the basement, and we're passing somebody, and they got like a bone through their nose and something coming out of their ear and half a purple hair, and the currency was different. It had nothing to do about somebody's mother and what they or what they made and what they drove. The currency was all about talent, right? The currency was different. So his mindset, his upbringing as a creative is going to be very different. Even in being in Atlanta, and that mindset is going to be very different than my experience in this microcosm of FAMU, which definitely has excellence, but could definitely be a microcosm of all these beautiful shades of Black people around me. But even in that, I mean, that's a microcosm, right? I mean, if somebody's from Texas even, and they're from Austin or Dallas or Houston, there's so many differences in that alone. If you're in Florida, you're from Miami and Jacksonville, very different, right? So all of those things come in our mindset in the sense of me saying one black man's opinion. And that's in the same household, right? So that's 4 young men in the same household that think very differently about the world. If you're talking about politics or policy or healthcare or, all kind of things. So obviously, to your point in your article, you can't just be lumping black people into one thing and believing that all of them believe the same thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna go down a tangent on that one though. This idea of a meritocracy, and you noted that at NASA, of course, you would expect that in the sciences we've got a meritocracy. If you're good, you rise through the ranks. You mentioned Atlanta School of the Arts. Art school, you would expect if your work is good, you will rise through the ranks. For me, both my parents are out of the Coast Guard Academy, met in New London, both came from their respective hoods, dad in St. Thomas, mom in Philly. And they got out of poverty via the Coast Guard Academy. And, growing up as a military brat, my world was framed as everything ought to be a meritocracy. If you're good in the military, you rise up through the ranks. That's not exactly the case, since I got kind of a second education on how the military functions later in life. The idea of fuck up, move up. If people don't want to deal with you anymore, you'll get the promotion, so they don't have to put up with you. And some of the garbage that my parents went through at the academy, being one of a handful of black cadets, that has reframed the way that I think about the world. And then, of course, in my own professional experience building companies, the most recent Painless 1099, we built a smart bank account and a portable benefits package for independent contractors. So we built a bank for freelancers. Would not recommend trying to build a bank. It's a pain. And now that we've pulled the plug, we couldn't scale it and gave it a good 5-year run. It takes longer to unbuild a bank than it does to build a bank. So if anybody was thinking about bank building, don't. But with Painless as an experience, I had a couple really informative or formative, I suppose, experiences through that. And now as I look back as kind of a debrief or a postmortem, I had an investor the other day ask how much of my experience in fundraising and not fundraising was because I'm a black founder. And by the numbers, less than 2% of venture capital goes to founders of color, even less than that to black women founders. Something like 25% of VC, only 25%, some almost less, just less than 25% of venture capitalists have black partners in a decision-making position. And so as you think about, this idea for me that my career is predicated on merit and how good I am, not the color of my skin, what I look like, how I think, how I approach things, just am I good? That leads me to the introduction of this term, attributional ambiguity. And it's a term that we use in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And what it means is, when we weren't able to raise more money to continue building Painless, was that because the company didn't make sense? I'll be the first to say operator error, some of the economics didn't make sense for the business. We needed a lot more money to scale, but we needed a lot more traction to get a lot more money, so on and so forth. We had some incredible opportunities to go build that the right way, and we didn't execute. That speaks to merit. But at the end of the day, in the back of my mind, I will always consider some of the experiences I had in sitting in investment rooms with venture capitalists, trying to raise money. How much of my inability to raise the next tranche of capital to build arguably an interesting company, how much of that was because I'm black and don't fit the Mark Zuckerberg Ivy League, dropped out of school, white guy, go build a thing in the Valley? how much of my inability to raise was because I didn't fit that mold. And so bringing it back to that term attributional ambiguity, the burden again falls on our shoulders to consider, did I not raise because the business wasn't sound, or did I not raise because I'm Black, or was it some hybrid of the two? That question in the back of my mind puts an additional layer of consideration on top of just building a company. I was having a conversation about this last night with a good friend, and she was like, it sucks to hear you talk about the company not being as sound as it should have been. And I was like, yeah, it sucks a little bit because I've seen white guys raise a lot more money over stupider ideas, to put it bluntly. And like, is that their fault? Is it my fault? Hard to say, but what I know is if I were afforded the same opportunities, maybe I'd be in a different place. And I say that with full knowledge that, I'm highly privileged and have had some incredible opportunities in my life, and even then there's this idea of, well, if I bring it up and I talk about being Black over the course of building a company, am I bitching and moaning about some of the things I'm not afforded? And does that take time away from me building the thing? Or should I talk about it in order to hopefully circumnavigate some of the issues or overcome some of the bias and friction in being able to build and be successful? And so there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there, and that therein lies some of the burden, some of the consideration, some of the stress that attributional ambiguity puts on me. Is it because I'm not good, or is it because I'm Black? And do we conflate the two in some of the circles that I run in professionally? All of that is the consideration. And as we talk about burden, I think those are big pieces of it.
And you reference, Ace, you talked about that model, right? If you're talking about that Zuckerberg or, whoever, Jack Dorsey or whatever that template is, right? That's also dealing with familiarity, right? I mean, like, how familiar is someone with a certain subject matter or a certain experience, right? Interestingly enough, as we are addressing even, these folks calling the cops on people, calling law enforcement for whatever, situation they're in, and this is dealing with a lot of fear and probably the unknown, which is unfortunate. Hopefully more people are becoming more familiar through just relationships, through hopefully their children, right? A lot of people have to interact because of their children. And as we said earlier, understand, oh, that's Ace, that could be Ace, that could be Jon. But the perspective is so valuable. My wife and I were driving the other day, and I saw this brother, and he was under like the side of a hill. He had no shirt on and he was glistening, right? I said to her immediately, oh, because we were just watching some scenario on whatever, news network. And as he was walking up the hill, I saw his shoulders glisten. I said, oh, man, he must have just got it in, right? Letitia has been on this, 90-mile challenge and dragging me along for dragging me along. So we've been, doing a lot of running and walking and things of that nature. So when I saw him, that was my perspective, right? Just seeing him, not even the rest of his body glistening, like, oh man, he must be getting it in, like he must be running, right? And I said to her, I think it's so unfortunate that somebody else can see that scenario and think something totally different, right? Totally different, like, especially as he might be getting closer, that he's a threat, or just the immediate, glance at him that he should not be here. He should not be in this space, right? Which, again, we're just, downtown or whatever. That dude could be wherever you could be, right? I mean, why is this a discussion? Hilarious at the end of that discussion, as he was walking up and got up the hill, he had on flip-flops, right? And teacher's like, man, that dude ain't getting it in. That dude was just walking, right? So, but it's hilarious in the sense of all of those iterations that we went through in that one scenario just by visual. And when you have these scenarios where people are not familiar, right? You Ace walking into the, an elevator and somebody, grabbing their purse, or walking down the aisle and, or walking down a whatever kind of street or whatever, and somebody, kind of tinging up or whatever it is. Ace, you can be a scenario like Ace owns this building. What are you talking about? Trust me, he doesn't need that purse, right? But people's experiences and their familiarity or lack of familiarity with the situation definitely is going to, have their perspective be very different. And definitely when you talk about VCs funding, when somebody's sitting across the table from somebody getting a loan from a home, getting a loan for a home or business or whatever it is, it's going to be the same scenario. How familiar are they with this situation, especially if they've never ever been through it and have no context at all?
And I think that's aptly put. That brings us to where we are today. And I heard it framed really well. I know, Jon, you and I were chatting about this last week. The framing, and I won't take credit because I did not come up with it, but it was, if a pot of water boils over, you don't blame the water, you blame the flame beneath it. And so we're seeing this correction, perhaps an overcorrection to some of the racial injustice that we've had in our country by design for centuries. And now we're in this place where, our I will say my temper is shortened substantively. And I for anybody who knows me, I'm not an angry guy. Never have been really. And just even what I phrased in the piece, like, it was really uncomfortable for me to write that piece because that is not who I am. But at some point, enough is enough. And this idea of talking and being peaceful and, not flying off the handle and not going, full angry black man on folks, that is a luxury that I don't know that I care to extend to everybody all of the time anymore.
Right.
That is the burden,
Right.
This idea that I'm supposed to be well behaved in order to interact with folks. Sure, that furthers my goal or my cause. But really good example, Clarence, who I know I connected you with, Clarence Bethia, good buddy, just the consummate founder up in the Twin Cities. He had somebody was tweeting about it the other day. He had somebody come to his door and they were selling something and they said, I'm looking for the homeowner. Can you get him for me? Or are you the homeowner? And to anybody who hasn't had that experience, they would answer, I'm the homeowner. Clarence's response was, didn't you see me answer the door? Who do you think I am? And so in this Twitter thread, there was this guy who jumped in and looked like a middle-aged white guy. And per his bio, that was the case. Middle-aged white guy pops in and he's like, well, you didn't need to use all that snark or something to that effect. And I look at that interaction, that had nothing to do with me. And I see it on the internet and I think, I know exactly what Clarence is experiencing, right? I know that is not the singular instance where something like that happened and Clarence jumped to some conclusion. Right. What I know is that over history for Clarence, his experience has been such that he is not seen as he belongs or may not be the owner of or stole that thing or did that or, is in a place where he is not welcomed. And that small microaggression that is overlooked by so many other people was clear, evident, and met with a similar but opposite force as Clarence responded. And I'm not surprised at that. And I don't know how many times people can expect us to just take those things on the chin and say, oh, I'm the homeowner. At some point, the snark is the most polite that we might be able to be, other than slamming the door in the guy's face, right? And so the privilege of this other individual to step in and say, well, you should have met that. You should have interacted with that engagement differently. Again, in the same way I've got folks asking me to explain and give them something to do. This idea that you can demand peaceful interaction or more information or education continues to put burden on us, and we're dealing with bullshit day in and day out. I don't know a better way to say that. We're dealing with bullshit, and the expectation is that we take it on the chin with a smile and interact in the world as if nothing's happening. That is unacceptable, and it's an unacceptable ask from the communities in which we exist. That is pure, as my dad would say, pure unmitigated bullshit, and that is true. That's my soapbox.
No, man. Keep speaking from that viewpoint. The subtleties are so important, right? I found myself, and I have to make sure I put it out into the world, but I found myself responding initially when, friends were checking in, very close, dear friends, people that I definitely believe care for me and my family and love me and just kind of wanted to know where I was, how I'm doing, right? I mean, not only are we in the middle of a global pandemic, right? You got all of this unrest going on, or maybe awareness, right? Maybe this rise in awareness going on. And I responded to a lot of people like, hey, you have a part, right? You have a part in this. And your part is to check those among you, right? The important part is for people to understand this is bigger than the atrocities, right? Much bigger than the atrocities. A lot of times, a lot of racism and the power of racism is implemented and distributed in the subtleties, right? Not the atrocities, right? What has happened over many years is most people have been really pushed to an island in the sense of like the rest of us don't agree with you, so you take that foolishness over there and be by yourself. Unfortunately, in the world today, some of that has risen more out in the public because it has been more generally accepted. And unfortunately, leadership at highest levels has also encouraged it, so it has spoken up and reared its ugly head in many situations. But for the majority of people, they say, hey, that's not warranted. It's not welcome. You stand over there, right? So it doesn't mean that people don't feel like they feel, or people are not having those discussions in their homes, right? But the subtleties, the little things that happen are where a lot of things that we need to combat. And I remind people, I ask them before we start having these coffees and lunches, or virtual coffees and virtual luncheons and things of that nature, ask yourself, where are you in all of this? And what have you done? And what can you done moving forward, right? Because as you know, Ace, for every, joke that you let slide, right? For every time you heard somebody say that somebody was, acting, being too sensitive in a matter, or just overreacting in a matter, right? For every slur that you heard and you didn't respond in the moment because you were in the minority, right? You might have been amongst people and you heard something that was inappropriate, but you let it slide because you didn't want to create a scenario that was going to make somebody feel uncomfortable, even though it should have felt uncomfortable for the other person saying it because it was inappropriate. How much of that has happened in your lifetime that you have left unchecked, right? So when you are asking me, what can you do? What should you do? That's the opportunity, right? For me, that's the opportunity. Check those people, check those cousins and brothers and sisters and family members, those dads and granddads, right? Let them know that's not welcome, right? Let them know we'll have no parts of that. That's not happening, right? And people act like, I'm glad that, when people are flying Confederate flags and other things, I mean, for me, it's like, no, that's good. Like, point yourself out. Thank you for identifying yourself, right? But when people are doing this and people are, I can't believe that. I mean, I just responded to somebody today when people are coming at me with, oh, Jon, we're better than this. And I always ask them, are we? Are we better than this, right? I mean, because it doesn't look like, I'm showing you a prime example of how we're not better than this, right? But folks, have to remember, we are not so far away from this, right? My dad went to A&T undergrad, North Carolina A&T.
Yep.
And I think everybody pretty much can remember this historical piece about these 4 young men at North Carolina A&T that started the sit-in movement at the counter, right? At Woolworth in Carolina. And my dad knows those guys, right? That's not a historical photo for him. Like, he knows their names. Like, boom, 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 right? He knows that discussion on campus, right? That's the fall. I think they came in the fall of '59, and that happened, I think, February 1st, 1960, I believe, right? So if my dad knows those guys and he is in the mix of all of this, those guys, and I learned more about that story recently. Those guys, those 4 were freshmen, which their their youth might have even helped the culture shift in the sense of just being young and bold and like, forget this, right? But if my dad is on this side, if my dad is on this side of a dog being launched at him or a fire hose being pointed at him, if my dad is on this side, then your dad is potentially on the other side, right? This is not 200 years ago. This is like, right? My dad just turned 80. God bless him and everything that he has taught his boys. But that is not very far away, right? If my dad is speaking about his granddad and you're speaking about your granddad, these are very like in our generation discussions, right? So to think that a bank president is thinking, totally opposite of me or totally aligned with me in 2020 just because, your bank put out a statement about Black Lives Matter is probably not correct, because there's so much that you learn in your home when your granddad and other things, that there's a lot of structure that has to be undone. And we need to remember that in our daily interactions and navigation. We can get there, but there's a lot to be done.
I think there's those challenges, right? The what can you do that starts at home, and part of the piece that I wrote was a piece to share, and that was one of the explicit asks. It's like share the piece, and let folks digest that at their own pace and work through it and reread sections, and hopefully that is helpful as a primer, perhaps to some of the hard conversations you might have within your family or friend circles or household. The second is, it's really easy to say you ought to challenge people and you ought to call your folks out. I think it's harder to understand what that looks like if you haven't done it before, right? It's really, it's uncomfortable and it feels like this intangible thing that you're supposed to do but don't know how to do it. So I'll maybe share an example or two. I think back to a partner of mine years ago. I used to use a homophobic term as a pejorative. Your stereotypical jock, I suppose, saying this is that, and I don't want to do that because that's so and so or such and such. And I remember using the term once. And she stopped and she said, "You're a college-educated male with a vast vocabulary. That's the word that you chose to use, knowing the damage that it does to the LGBTQ community." And it was just this very thoughtful challenge of something that I didn't think twice about, given my background and the culture that I grew up in. Had not stopped to think about the fact that I was using a term referring to a group of people as a pejorative. And that's probably 7-8 years ago, not that far removed as somebody who considers themselves a diversity and inclusion professional. The point being, none of us are perfect. None of us are there all of the time. And having folks in our lives willing to introduce some discomfort, to call us out in a way, or perhaps call us in to check us, right?
That's right.
That was huge. And fast forward, I was on I was having a discussion, a podcast, probably a week and a half ago, with good friends. We're all on this podcast recording, and we were talking about the Confederate monuments, and one guy was talking about the folks who were defending Confederate monuments as a term referring to the female anatomy. And the other buddy on the call said, "Look, we ought not use misogyny to combat racism." And it was a soft. It didn't feel like a punch in the gut, but it was a way to check the tone, the tenor, and the terms in the conversation, and will probably stick not only with me in how he phrased that. That's something I'll borrow as and when I hear pieces like that. But it'll stick with our buddy who, threw it out there. Probably didn't think twice about it. Military guy, has had these experiences that informed the usage of that term. But he's been checked and will probably resonate over time as he goes into other interactions where maybe that's not how he's framing or phrasing things, and perhaps that goes a level or two deeper to reevaluate why that term is supposedly, you know, why that term fits in the context of the conversation he thought he was having. So I always like to share pieces like that to say I'm guilty of it. Most of us are, and how and where we check folks is important.
Absolutely. You I meant to bring up this image, and trust me, that's a whole nother discussion that we can get on. Maybe we'll make that a part 2. But you are in Virginia, and there's a lot going on throughout the world, not just the United States, but Virginia. There's a lot going on, right? Obviously, Virginia has a lot of history when we talk about the founding of our nation and the Constitution and things of that nature. Tell me what's going on in Virginia. What's the spirit look like? What's happening here? I sent you a beautiful photo. I know it was a projection with Black Lives Matter, and I think it was Harriet Tubman on a Confederate monument. And I think a tweet that I saw, somebody said I'm feeling conflicted about it. How beautiful this imagery is now on this Confederate monument about it being taken down. What's going on? What's going on, Ace? What's going on up in Virginia?
Yeah, I mean, I am in Richmond, Virginia, so the former capital of the Confederacy. We've got, I believe, the largest collection of second place trophies in the country, and so we're participation trophies, if you will. So we're having a local and even regional, as you think about, the Fredericksburgs and Charlottesvilles and even down into Norfolk, the areas that also have some long-lasting Confederate odes to Confederacy through the cities. And so, in the Central Virginia region and even down to Southeast Virginia, there's so much of that. Richmond, again, has the most of it. The Jefferson Davis's house, so the White House is here. We've got schools named after Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis. When I think about Lee Davis High School, we've got Confederates or whatever, and then we've got these monuments down Monument Avenue, these massive, imposing pieces of hardware that are, they were testament to the lost cause. This idea that romanticized the cause of the Southern states and their secession, and why they were adamant about subjugating the Black community and keeping them enslaved. So we've got these monuments, and of course the argument around us is, we ought not be erasing history. The monuments, perhaps, they're beautiful pieces of art, and we shouldn't just take them down. And this is my heritage, and it's not a heritage of hate, as I like to frame it. But there's so much conversation around the monuments, and a couple things stand out to me. First off, symbols mean something. It's the reason
Absolutely.
There aren't statues of Hitler floating around in former Nazi Germany. It's the reason
That's
U.S.
right.
Marines pulled down the statue of Saddam. When we think about symbolism, we know that symbols mean something. We know that we don't fly somebody's flag higher than ours on American soil, right? Like, we know
That's
that
right.
we were beaten, the NFL thugs, as our president called them, up because they're not respecting the flag, which is a symbol. And we won't get into the flag and respect of the flag and boycotting conversation, because Lord knows we could run with that.
Another discussion.
Another time. But the idea that symbolism is important, you can't have it both ways, right? You can't say the statues
That's
don't
right.
mean something, but those thugs don't respect our flag. We are putting up a symbol of a thing, of an ideology, of a sentiment, and we are affording some level of respect because it exists and takes up public space. Those symbols, to me, the history is important as well. You know, I've got folks who say these been here longer than you and I, and they're from. I got into a fight with the guy at the Robert E. Lee statue a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, he was wearing a Vietnam veterans hat, and he's like, you know, these things been here for me and you. These things been here since the Civil War. And I was like, well, respectfully, those things have been there since the early 1900s. 1910 to 1920 is the time frame in which most of our statues went up in Richmond. You know, and it was around the time post Reconstruction, this resurgence of you know, the ideology of the lost cause and building an all-white neighborhood in Richmond, Virginia, and having these statues as a cornerstone of that all-white neighborhood being imposing and intimidating to the Black community. I mean, if we think historically about why these things went up, when they went up, and the fact that they were reinforcing the societal structure of our community, if we actually have an intellectually honest conversation about why and when we put statues up, and to whom they were supposed to be, you know, perhaps detrimental to, that context lends a lot of it ends a lot of ammo, I suppose, to the conversation about taking them down. And we've got folks who want to pick and choose and cherry pick how and why these things came about. And so specifically in Richmond, we're having not only a conversation about the monuments, and I'll circle back there really briefly, but we're having a conversation about police reform and defunding the police and thinking about where we ought to be investing those dollars otherwise, about community oversight and how we are keeping the people who have been, who are in a position to protect and serve, how we're keeping them accountable for their actions. And, you know, it's ending the qualified immunity. You know, there are so many structural pieces in our community that work against keeping citizens safe and doing that equitably. Those are the conversations we're having in Richmond. And what I want to be really pointed about is I would rather get the real work done on social justice and equity and reform. I would rather get the real work done and leave the statues up. I think the statues are the right first step. They're not the only step. And what I don't want to end up is being in a scenario where we've taken the statues down and then the community is looking at us and saying, what else do you people want? You know, the statues are an indicator that we have not moved past or moved into a space where we can get to equity. They're an indication, but they are not the thing that is precluding equity in our community. It's the policy and the legislature and our ability to influence how our community is serving us. That's the long work. That's the real work. That's the work we ought to be doing. And to think that anything else is to think that anything else is going to supplement or replace the long work is naive. It's foolish. And I don't want to get the wool pulled over our eyes saying, we gave you the statues. We're not trading horses here. We're demanding that we either get equity, that we get to a place where we've reformed appropriately, or we'll keep burning shit. And I'm kind of okay with that, you know?
Indeed. Ace, I'm going to stop. I promised that we would be an hour. It's been an amazing discussion. Obviously, we have a lot to discuss, so we can get back to these Confederate monuments. And that's a whole nother discussion. We can get back to kneeling and kneeling during the national anthem, which is going to be interesting in the fall, especially with athletes already coming out, letting their ownership know. I'm going to tell you where I am right now. So a lot's going on. But I did say I want to be respectful of people's time. We started it at noon. This is our lunch, our summer lunch series, because we knew we could squeeze it in for at least a little part of the day, maybe while people are taking a break. I am going to formally end it now, but I do see a hand up, and hopefully this can be an ongoing thing. So if we need to cut the recording and everybody has the breakaway, feel free, but I know I have a couple of questions. So Ace, if you're open for it, I'm going to be bold here and take somebody's live discussion. So I'm going to allow somebody to talk. I see somebody with their hand up. So let's see how this goes. We can always cut it off if it goes haywire, right, sideways. So let's see.
I'm here for it. Let's roll.
Me too, man. Hey, the boldness. Let's see. I think it's Andre. Andre, we got you on live, man. We're on the call-in hour. Can you hear us?
He can hear us, but he's muted. There we go.
Yes, and believe it or not, Andre is a girl.
Hello, Andre.
Hello, Andre girl.
How are you?
Hey, this is all about us not assuming. So, you know what I didn't? Did I say? If I say he, I'm wrong. I apologize. Andre, talk to us.
What was the question at hand?
Oh, I don't know. You had your hand up. We wanted to hear what you had for us.
That was probably by accident. I am just thoroughly enjoying the dialogue and the discussion as it relates, especially to the monuments. And I'm of the mindset that a lot of the monuments need to come down, but there are some monuments that I think historically speaks to who we are as a country. And my question to you, Ace, as well as you, Jon, is do you think all monuments must come down? When you think about the Constitution of the United States back in the beginning of time, where only 8 out of every 8 white men could vote, it wasn't really a constitution that was for equality. So my question to you is that the country itself was not established with justice. Removing everything, is that going to make a difference?
All right. Well, thank you for timing.
Andre,
I'm gonna mute.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
when I think back to the piece and the analogy that I came into via a conversation prior to writing it, we have this idea that we're remodeling the country, and Andre, I think you said it poignantly. The Constitution was not built for equality necessarily, right?
Right.
Because so many people were excluded when we were drafting it. And so I use the architectural analogy to say, we are not remodeling the house. We can't remodel the house because so many people are saying the foundation is cracked. And I would say, arguably, the foundation is firmly intact. It was designed to exclude our individual. The foundation is intact. It is working as designed. And in order to remodel the house, we ought to knock the whole thing down and start over, starting with the foundation. Tracking back to your more specific question on the monuments, I'm not an absolutionist on anything. Do all monuments need to come down? I think we ought to idealize ideas, not people. Then we don't have to go back and revise who we have up on a pedestal based on ideologies that might be outdated, generations or centuries down the road. So we can think all the way back to the ancient Greeks and some of the statues we have up of guys who were arguably pedophiles. There's so much context that is, I think, appropriate when we talk about the monuments. Should we pull all of them down? No, I don't know that that's the best use of time, but the commitment to not having or not glorifying individuals who were so counter to the ideals that we hold dear today, I think is a step. It's a commitment, and it says that we are doing the right things. We are changing our thinking, and we no longer are comfortable having these folks as pillars or on pillars, quite literally, in our communities. So I think there's a middle ground there, but I think it's a good step. I don't know that removing all of them does the right thing, nor do I know that it's time well spent. Again, if we focus on the real work, the long work, I'd rather have that than all the statues. I'd love to have my cake and eat it too. Let's get the real work done and take the statues down, perhaps. But that's a long answer to a short question, but that's how I'm chewing on it today, and maybe that changes tomorrow. I think that's the fun of being a human.
Yeah, I got I don't know. I'm not, trust me, I'm not bothered by any of these monuments being pulled down at all. I do like your point, Ace. Let's not take our eye off the prize, right? Let's not be unfocused on all of the work that needs to be done. But I also want to be very respectful to my elders that have put in a lot of time and energy and sacrifice, emotionally, physically, that what those things represent to us now and what those things represent to them. and those that came before them. I saw a photo of the flag, the Confederate flag. Obviously, Mississippi has made some recent changes related to their state flag, and there's a mayor in Mississippi where they were pulling down the flag, and the mayor was very emotional. A black mayor was very emotional. Those things like that matter, right? I mean, somebody in their lifetime seeing President Obama not only run for office but also get elected, those things matter, right? That's a lot of generational just terrible things that have been done. Those things aren't being righted, but definitely these are steps towards righting certain wrongs. So I also feel some different ways about this discussion about should they be taken down properly or should they be torn down, right? I mean, sometimes you don't get to choose that, right? That's the same discussion with people talking about the protests and riots, right? You don't get to choose that sometimes. I mean, when this is the voice of the people, what's going to happen is what's going to happen. And remember, I always remind people on the other side of this, especially even for the NFL, right? Some of the discussions they made recently, and Roger Goodell coming out and now saying, you know, hey, he understands it. They took the wrong steps, the wrong action. Mind you, I've heard no owner come out and also address that. I think that San Francisco has a Black Lives Matter flag hanging out their stadium. So obviously their ownership is in some way, shape, or form supporting this, but I've heard none of the other owners coming out saying anything about this, just Roger Goodell. He's the head. He is needing to make amends and say this. But on the other side of this was Colin Kaepernick peacefully taking a knee. And which is interesting is now you see throughout the nation, you have law enforcement in communities taking a knee with people in the community. Great step, great understanding of the fact that, hey, this is the community you serve. You need to understand what is ailing them and hear them and meet them where they are. That's a great step. But, you know, you rewind a year ago, 2 years ago, and peacefully kneeling was, being disrespectful and launching emotional and verbal attacks in a whole nother fashion. So, people had a choice. So when you see Targets and Wendy's burning down, this is a result of things that were between then and now. I
don't know that having law enforcement kneeling with us is doing the thing that they think it is. You know, after all of the things we've gone through and the fact that police are still cracking skulls across the country, you know, it feels more like pandering than anything else. Pandering for a photo opportunity. There's got to be real procedural and policy change before I'm going to see a cop hugging, folks in the community or kneeling with folks or marching with folks. You know, that is nice, I suppose. Maybe we'll see. But we've got to see some real change before that means anything to me, to very diplomatically push back on that, John.
No, and even in that, I mean, that's a longer discussion I'm going to love to have about law enforcement. Maybe we'll pull some folks on. I mean, I think one of the things that people have to remember when anybody is talking about law enforcement, these things aren't mutually exclusive, right? It's not like black people versus law enforcement, right? I mean, there are black people in law enforcement. I have a very good brother, very close to me. I saw him in the beginning of this pandemic when I was running out doing a necessities run, and it was the first time I've seen him in probably maybe at this point almost 15 years or more that I haven't embraced him, right? We just kind of looked at each other across the aisle and kind of stopped and paused, right? He's on the SWAT team, right? He's a black man. So imagine this, Ace, right? You talk about complexities and nuance. Imagine him dealing with a scenario with somebody dealing with, inequities, racism, just foolishness in general. right? One thing about SWAT team that you know is literally they get a call and have to respond, right? So they could be at a wedding, they could be laying on the beach, they could be having a beer, they could be sleeping, whatever. When they get the call, they have to move, right? So imagine dealing with some foolishness in the street just from some clown, right? Getting a call 20 minutes later and having to come back and protect that clown, right? I mean, so people have to understand when we're talking about, again, law enforcement in this discussion, to me, they're not mutually exclusive. They're not versus. We have to understand that some of these Black men and Black women are within law enforcement and dealing with some of these same challenges, subtleties, and atrocities outside of their wearing the badge also, or even during wearing the badge. So these are definitely larger discussions. Hey, Ace, man, I promised you an hour. I thank you for going a little bit longer, brother. We have more discussions to have. Everybody stay tuned in. We have a discussion coming up on Thursday related to mental health with Dr. Derek Griffith and Dr. Kenneth Fowler. That's going to be an interesting discussion. Ace reminded me, I'm so thankful that we could get this done in June. June is Men's Health Month, if you weren't informed. And as we talk about Black men and creating more balance through health for men of color, and specifically Black men, it was important that we go ahead and get this thing kicked off in June. We wanted to have a discussion about mental health in May, and Ace reminded me, hell, if we're talking about mental health, every month is mental health month. So I appreciate that reminder, Ace. So we'll get back to that on Thursday, and we have a lot of future discussions coming up. So stay tuned in on the social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and also the website that definitely needs to be updated, but we wanted to get this off and rolling first. So one step at a time. We're thankful for you helping us build this, Ace, and we have plenty of work to do. So God bless you, brother. Thank you for being a part of this initial discussion, and we look to have you back on soon.
Absolutely, Jon. Appreciate you having me. I saw somebody mention we've got to keep the conversation rolling, so a part 2 at some point this summer for sure. And excited to see Black men's health growing, getting off the ground, and all the incredible work you're doing. So I appreciate you having me, man.
Thank you, brother. If anybody missed it, you can find the article that we were talking about from Ace on Medium. And they've elevated it to the top, so it's not just in Ace's space. It's definitely at the top of Medium. We thank Medium for supporting that and elevating that discussion. And we'll make sure that we post some links on social and to the website. Ace, God bless, brother. Talk to you soon.
All right, y'all. Be good.
Peace. Respect.